I have these fabric strips that I cut up out of some fat quarters that I got at Walmart. They are 2.5 inches wide by 22 inches. I've already organized them how I would like them rearranged. I'm going to make some small placemats. For the one I'm making, I'm only using 8 of these fat quarter strips. So they're 22 inches long by 2.5 inches wide. I'm going to start by sewing them all end to end in the order of which I want them. I'm sewing them at a diagonal because that's what I like to do with mine. So all I'm doing is putting the fabric with the printed side down on top of the one with it facing up, and then just sewing at a diagonal. I am chain stitching just so that it's easier. Recently I've had people asking about back stitching on these, and I do not do that because I don't see how it's necessary, because these strips are going to be folded in half and then in half again, so I don't think there's an issue with that, especially with being sewn together. After I get all my strips sewn together into one long chain, I'm going to cut off the triangle ends and snip in between those triangle ends. I have a whole huge bin of them. I have ideas, but I have not bothered to dive into using those fabric scraps yet. I think I'm cutting these about 1/4 inch towards the seam there. Once I'm done with that, I have a bucket down on the side right here where I'm just letting them all fall. It's something new that I'm doing, and I've been loving it. So easy. So now I'm adding the fabric and the batting together using my tool here. It's called a tube maker, jelly roll tube maker. Folding the ends of the fabric in and then again in half. And then I'm going to use my magnetic seam guide here, and I'm going to start stitching down the side, just a regular stitch, and I am going to be doing it at 1/4 inch seam allowance. You can do whatever you'd like. Some people like sewing them down the middle or doing a fancy stitch. I'm just doing it like this. So all I'm doing is using that tool to help fold the fabric, and then I'm going to sew it together. This is going to get my fabric ropes here that I'm going to be able to use to assemble and coil to make my fabric placemat. I have my fabric ropes sewn together, and now I'm ready to start sewing. I'm going to be doing 1.5 inches for my start. I like doing this with my placemats. I just find it easier. So I'm going to clip where I want it, and then once I have it measured, this is where I'm going to start my first fold. So this is how I do my centers. I'm going to flip the fabric over down where I have it measured, and then I'm going to flip it back under again. That little triangle flap there is where I'm going to be sewing across. I like to sew across that. I find that it helps secure it down a little bit. I use pins to help. And then I'm going to be folding it back over like this. And I want to make sure that I am going to be getting that on the back, that my zigzag stitch when I go to do it is going to catch both. And then I flip that side up. So this is what it looks like when I start. I'm going to take my clip off, and now I'm ready to start it. And I'm going to show you the path. I sew here, and then I sew down here and around, and that starts the path for the coiling for the placemat. So I already sewed that little triangle flap, and so now I'm going to start down here, and this is the path I'm going to be taking. Once I get down to that second little flap, I'm going to want to make sure that I take my time and help it go through. It is thick. I'm using a walking foot. I find that that helps. Right there, I just go over enough for my needle to hit on top of that flap, and then I'm going to keep my needle down, and I'm going to lift the feet up, and I'm going to pivot so that I can continue down my path and do the same right here. And now I'm going to be able to start sewing in that circular pattern. I like to use pins in this step because I find that it's just easy to keep everything nice and secure and helps keep my middle flat. So I always start right there, and then I'm going to bunch my fabric, and I just kind of fidget with it until I have it how I like it and how it looks good, overlapping that little bit of triangle flap there. And then I pin it to make sure it's nice and secure. Sometimes I like to press it with my iron on a low heat setting, but I don't always do this. It just depends, I think, on the fabric and stuff that you're using. But it does help. It helped me a lot in the beginning when I first started. So these first few corners are so tricky, and you want to really take your time. So I'm taking my time here, taking my pins out, stopping, pushing my fabric down, just making sure everything's going to fit how I want it to. And then you will see I did lift my foot up and leave my needle down, and I pivot my material just so that I'm making sure that that zigzag stitch is catching on both sides, because sometimes when you're trying to go around that harsh corner like that in there, I've noticed that your stitching will get a little wonky and it doesn't always catch both sides. So that's just something that I've started doing to make sure that I'm doing and getting that zigzag on both sides. So again, I'm overlapping. This is the only time I'm going to overlap my material is on these first two corners because of that little triangle flap. So what I'm aiming for here is a nice round outside edge. I am sewing in real time. It's not slowed down or sped up or anything like that, just so you can see how much I take my time and just really pay attention to where my stitches are going and how my fabric's laying and what's going on with it to ensure that it lays nice and flat and everything's nice and neat. I do want to note that I do sew with my seams on the outside. A lot of people like to do it reverse where the seam is on the inside. I have just found that this works best for me. I like the way it looks, I like the way it works, and how the fabric moves and how I get it to lay and everything. It's just what works for me. But I love to make sure that I mention that for you guys. So that's how I do my bends here. I take it out like this, and then I just kind of like scrunch that material up like that, just so that I know that it's like sitting nice and flat, because with all that extra material going around, it needs to bunch up a little in there. And then I pin it. At this stage, I only use 2 pins. It's just what I like. You can use more. As it gets larger, you don't have to bunch the material as much, but you still want to make sure that there's still a little bit of a give with these circular um, rugs, placemats, and things like that. Also, I always pay attention to how it's coming out after I'm sewing it. So right around on this side, if you start to see your material start to cup up like this, you're going to want to pay attention and see if you can lay it down. And you're going to want to bunch more of your fabric then, because you're not giving it enough. And so it's starting to cup up, and you don't want that. It'll start to cause issues further down too if it's too bad. So it's just something to keep an eye out for. Even still now, sometimes if I get going fast, mine will do that. I think really taking your time and just being patient and at a nice slow pace really pays off with these projects. So at this stage, I'm only using 1 pin. It's just what I like. I find that pinning really helps just to help keep that material where I want it as I go. It's just the way that I like to do it. So you can see like the material is not as bunched as it was in the beginning, but it still has just a little bit of it. And that's all I'm doing here with my right hand. I'm just helping like the material, like making sure that it's how I like it in between each section. So next I'm going to be doing the end. So well, this is how I do my ends. All I do is I take my scissors and I cut it at a little angle. It's usually like maybe 1 to 2 inches or so that I cut in an angle. The more of an angle, the more of a tapered end you can get with it. I do it differently every time. I never measure. I just, do it. Then once I get here, I have to really finick with it a little bit here. I take this little tool and I try to make sure that the batting's not going to be showing out, and I mess with the bottom just to get it how I want it to lay, nice and tucked up next to the other side of the fabric, so that when my zigzag stitch comes here, it's going to catch both sides nice and neat, and everything's going to lay nice and flat and together. And then when I get to the end, I'm going to go back and do a backward zigzag stitch over it. And then after that, I check the other side because sometimes it does not catch on both with this method because of cutting it at that angle there. And then I just go over it again on the other side if I see a little bit of that batting showing through and the material did not catch with both zigzags underneath. So I did check it, and mine did have just a little spot where I could see the batting where it didn't catch on both sides of the fabric. So I just flip it over, and I'm just going to do a quick stitch. You might want to redo it if you had material where like that stitch was going to show more, but since how this is black and white, you're not going to see it as much, so I don't mind going back over it with this another stitch, if that makes sense. So I'm all done. This was with my fat quarter material. I only used 8 of the 22-inch long strips. This equals out to be 11 inches in diameter, so it's a little bit smaller than my usual placemats, but I think it's still an all right size. It could even be used as like a warm, like a trivet kind of thing too if you wanted, but just something different that I was trying, and this is how it came out. So I hope that you found this helpful and understood it. I love being able to share what I'm doing and tips I've learned as I go. Thank you for watching.